Hey everyone, and welcome back. The Data Innovation Summit 2023, we're here with another panel of esteemed guests to discuss a topic which is top of mind for everybody and spoken about a lot. Can't stop reading about it on LinkedIn, can't stop hearing about it on TV. Has everything to do with the link between AI governance, machine learning operations, and responsible AI. Now, it's not always we use these terms to talk about these things, but they are interlinked in a certain number of ways. And I think it touches on the sentiment of people, because people talk about things like ethics, they talk about sort of who is responsible for what, they talk about copyright, all sorts of things, because it relates to people. And these are processes that we've inherited from best practices in software development and whatnot, and the question is, how applicable is it to AI? How easy is it? How hard is it? So, you're all experts in your fields. How about we start with a little round of introduction to hear who you are? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Ann-Elise, and I'm leading data and AI for the Northern market at IBM.
Nice.
Thanks, Robert. I'm Jesse McCrosky. I'm a principal data scientist and lead our social change and sustainability efforts at Thoughtworks.
Thoughtworks, all right.
Michelle Carlsson, head of data science strategy and evangelism at Domino Data Lab, and recovering industry analyst. I was at Forrester for 4 years covering data science, machine learning, and AI.
So you're recovering and on the light side now.
Indeed. Yes, it's not the dark side in any way.
All right, double agent. We'll see. We'll ask these questions. All right, let's hit it off with questions that we got from the audience. The first one is, how can organizations transition from data governance to AI governance? And there are a number of tools that have embedded best practice for how to manage data. You know, we're talking about decentralized data, federated data, and all that kind of stuff. And I think we're seeing a number of tools that are trying to embed similar thoughts about AI, for how to manage it, version it, and all that kind of stuff. Is it mature? Should we trust these tools? Is there a process? Are there best practices?
Yep.
What do you all think?
I can maybe start. I think there absolutely is so. I think first off, it's not data governance and now we only do AI governance. You first need to absolutely do your data governance. It's like, where can I find my data? Who can access it? And then really enforcing those governance policies, and then you go into that AI governance, which I would say is then the next step. So
you say it's a prerequisite. You have to have your data in order before you can get more mature in AI?
You need to govern it well if you want really to have like that observability in your AI lifecycle. You also need to make sure that, again, we enforce those governance policies, that not everyone can just get the data and then put a model in production on data that they were not supposed to get.
What about democratization? Because we've actually heard something about that in an earlier panel where some panelists were saying, you shouldn't just give everybody the data. And I know it's not popular because democratization of data means giving everybody everything, doesn't it? Or does it not? I mean, what is your take on that?
Well, sometimes certain data needs to be masked, right? So I think it starts already, but in which form you
mean for compliance reasons or what?
For compliance reasons, like PII data, you don't want that to be shared just like that. So I think, definitely from a regulation, I'm happy it's there, and I think we should adhere to it. But there are ways to get to data or to get to insights or to train models while still respecting that, right?
Okay.
So,
what do you think?
Transition. My sense of this is that really this is a whole new world for a lot of organizations. So obviously data governance is absolutely very, very important, but everything that goes on top of that is still very much in flux at a lot of organizations. Because when it comes to when you're training AI models, when you're building analytics applications on top of that, it's not just a question about being able to version and capture the data, it's also being able to version and capture the code that's used, the model that's created, the analytic artifacts that are off of this, and then later on through the life cycle to the model that was then deployed and the predictions that come off of that. And for a lot of organizations, they'll have a couple of those different capabilities, but they don't have a way to tie that all together. So you can tie back the prediction to the model, to the code, to the version of the data. And so I find that a lot of organizations out there are more mature on the data governance side and are hoping that this is just a little small add-on that they can add to it, and then this will be an extension of what they're doing. But the folks who are in charge of the data governance are so disconnected from the folks who are training the models and building the applications that really it sort of drops off a cliff after you move on from the data.
I'll speak briefly to your point about data democratization, and I did some work at Mozilla where we were trying to kind of like find what's the enough rope not to hang yourself kind of solution. And I think Thoughtworks does a lot of work with data mesh, and I think one of those principles out of data mesh is that data should be a product. And I think that's part of the answer to the data democratization question, is data should not be whatever you're putting into your server logs just goes everywhere else. You create products, you provide quality guarantees, you offer them to clients, and with that sort of model, you can have data democratization in a safe way. Talking more generally about AI governance, I think that to me, what differentiates AI governance from data governance is the unique risks that come with AI systems. And I think like the kind of more boring point is you should have risk-based approaches where you're doing risk assessments. You should understand your organization's values in a way that they can be operationalized in the metrics that you're choosing for your AI. But I think the more exciting aspect is actually around what's coming now. And I think AI is becoming powerful enough that the social impact can be so enormous and is so poorly understood that there's a need for transparency. And that it should not only be the big tech companies that are deciding what transformational technology is being unleashed on the world. So again, working with Mozilla, we do a lot of work around AI transparency. We actually just released a report about a month ago with some researchers there. And I think that we need, in order for all the needed stakeholders to have a seat at the table deciding how this tech should influence our society, we need policymakers, we need journalists, we need people like everyone listening today to be able to understand this technology in a way to be able to meaningfully discuss it.
I wouldn't miss, though, the opportunity to talk about just the opportunity for better ethical decision-making courtesy of machine learning and AI. This is one of those things where, if you talk about bias, if you talk about explainability and transparency, if you think machine learning is bad, have you tried humans? Right? On all of those dimensions, we are absolutely terrible at both understanding our biases, about going in and being able to actually explain what our decisions are made off of versus ex post justifications of what our decisions are made of. Yeah. And so the opportunity here to actually drive more ethical decision making using machine learning and AI is extraordinary, and I would hate for it to get lost in all of the worry and risk around potential irresponsible uses of it. I mean, obviously, there are huge
I think
risks
we need to spend a couple of rounds on this, the potential for positive ethics, because there's everything from being more ethical to being more, the fact that you can actually change an AI model once you've discovered a problem in it, whereas changing it, but
it'll tell you when there's a problem with it. You will find, if you monitor your model properly, you'll be able to detect it in a way that intuition and human-based processes you can't do.
All right, we're going to make that a central focus for this talk, but you did say something interesting that I want to hear you guys' reflection on, which was that data is a product, because funny enough, right before you said it, I was going to say, I think the difference between AI and data is that AI is more clearly a product. Now, and the reason I say that is because one of the things you have in a company when you identify something as a product, whether it's data or anything, is you have a life cycle and a product owner, somebody that's deciding the direction that the product heads in. It's very seldom that you have a product and you're like, my job here is done, right? And a product needs to be updated. You need to check if it still fits with the market over time, and so there's a sense of change, and maybe that's the case for data as well. But it's very clear in the case of AI that the purpose of AI is to change something, and you need to keep the AI up to date with that change happening. There needs to be a goal with it. You need to know when it's not relevant anymore. And there needs to be a person that manages that. And all too often I've seen in projects that I've been involved in that organizations think they can build an AI and then it's done and they put it somewhere and then they move on to the stuff that they're really supposed to do.
Yeah.
But you need to have an AI product manager and maybe even an AI data manager. And that's not to say that they're the equivalent of the kind of products that you sell to customers or whatnot, but there still needs to be a manager of that sort.
Yeah. So maybe also from an AI governance perspective, we really see it as that you have to have really the observability end-to-end of your life cycle, that within there you monitor for bias and maybe other metrics, right? But all of that automatically. And then that data, that it flows towards the risk management people. And that there you have business processes in place, because sometimes we talk a lot about the technology, but we forget the people and the processes. So I think that part is important, that of course the life cycle is continuous, so that you should be monitoring and having documentation, the metadata? Have you been monitoring? Where is the model? Is it still accurate? Should we be retraining it?
But let me plant a question here.
Yeah.
Because the question is, who is responsible for determining if a model is performing up to expectations or not
So I think that's still...
in an organization?
That's still both. I think there will also be a request probably for new roles within the company that are really looking at the AI governance part. But definitely, I think from a risk management perspective, we see that more and more C-level is really taking the responsibility there, that it's really in place, the governance end-to-end. So
I guess I have like an implicit question here. Is it IT's responsibility to make sure that the model is performing up to expectations?
well, can I just add? We did with the business value a research, and we see that companies are finding that it's less and less with technical people, more and more towards C-level and more risk management with people. So I just wanted to share that.
I think you sort of gave away the answer, though, when you before when you were asking the question, in the sense of that product manager role is a very good role to be responsible for the monitoring and the performance of the model. We always like to talk about how the business stakeholder should own the model, but frequently it's not realistic. The business stakeholder just doesn't understand enough about what the model is doing and what the application is doing for them to really own it properly. And so the product manager role is very effective for doing that. Now, but at the end of the day, somebody needs to own this that's above the product manager. And I guess where I'm seeing it these days landing is with a new breed of chief data and analytics officer or chief data officer who is increasingly taking ownership of those analytics and AI products in the organization.
Does that make sense? I mean, consider, for example, a recommender system in a food retail chain. So I've finished my shopping basket, and there's this one place where I buy often. I'm a vegan, so I don't want to have chicken as my recommendation, and I don't play with Duplo anymore, so I don't want to have toys as my recommendation. And still, the recommender engine, and this is not because they don't have good data scientists. I know this particular chain has tremendously talented data scientists, but the recommender system just gives me garbage recommendations. Such a shame, because that's an opportunity for upsell and stuff. Should the product manager, where should the product manager for that service to me as a customer be? Is that part of marketing? Is that part of IT? Is that a sort of product strategy owner? Where does it, I think I have an idea, but it's not clear to me that all companies know where that role would land naturally in their organization. Have you guys seen these sort of roles pop up for people that take responsibility for AI, and are there places where it lands better than others?
On my side, I usually find it depends on the maturity of the business. There's some business products which are mature enough that there are product owners and product managers embedded within a business unit who understand machine learning enough, they've been around enough, they've worked with it enough that they can own the output of a data scientist or a data science team that supports them. But often, you just don't have them. They don't have enough connection with the data and the analytics and the data science side of it. So there I'm seeing that folks on the data science center of excellence side of things, they have to go in and have their own product managers to go in and drive those. So in this particular example... if
like an extended V team that's out with everyone.
Exactly. So in this particular example, that business unit likely knows this well, the recommender system has been well embedded within it, they should be owning it. There should be a product manager within the business that owns this. But if you're going to something which is more experimental, so this is a computer vision use case, say, that the company hasn't gone leveraged before, there's no way that somebody within the business unit would actually have that experience. And all of a sudden, here, your AI center of excellence, your analytics center of excellence, they need to have a product manager in there to run that because there's just nobody on the business side that can.
Let's tie this back to data literacy. To what degree is data literacy necessary to be able to implement data governance in an effective fashion? Because you just gave the example, if you don't know how an image classifier works, or you don't know what's reasonable to expect from a language model, it's very difficult to sort of make reasonable assumptions about reliability and trustworthiness and all that kind of stuff.
I think it's more than data literacy. And to go back to your previous question, like who should own the performance of a model, I think that organizations need to understand that performance of an AI system is multidimensional. And this is where you get the problems of silos and kind of how this connects to responsible AI. You have a data science team that's working on this recommender system that's recommending you chicken and toys or whatever. And like they have a metric they've been told to optimize for, and maybe that's like how much business do they move, how many things do people buy, and maybe they have a model that's actually quite effective at that. As a side effect, it gives garbage to some people like yourself, but overall it works pretty well. And so if you think about kind of the performance from the perspective of that data science team, they're doing a great job. They're really happy with what they're doing. But if you think about like the risks in terms of like, irritating people like yourselves, potentially in terms of, legal compliance risks, that sort of thing, that's someone else. And that's why the data literacy needs to be cross-disciplinary in the sense that everybody understands there's more than one way to measure whether an AI system is working or not. And you need to have, I think, different people that are responsible for different aspects of that. And some of it is compliance, and some of it is marketing, and some of it is product. And that's why AI is so difficult for an organization to do well, because you end up with these silos. And the problem with AI is you have metrics, and everybody loves metrics. It's like playing a video game. I got a high score, I'm winning, Yeah. But the problem is there's a lot of ways to win that are not aligned with business success.
No.
But I think it's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to that. It's not only data literacy, it's maybe also people that are very good with data, maybe they don't see the risk, they don't know what business controls are. So I see both ways that they need to learn from each other. So yeah.
Well, there are certainly silos, right? And so
Yeah.
I 100% subscribe to what you just said, which is that you might have a data science team, and presumably this is the case at this retailer that I'm talking about, that the data science team has made a collaborative filtering model, which whatever metric that you're using is doing very well. But then there's a business reality, which is upsell or cross-sell. And that's data that they might not even be privy to.
Yeah.
And because they're in silos like that, the recommender system does, you asked us to make a recommender system that filters perfectly, and we did it. But that has nothing to do with the actual outcome of it.
Yeah.
And so I guess one question is, when it comes to data governance and sort of responsible AI, how do we get into the aspect of measuring the results of the actions that we're doing to achieve responsible AI, ethical AI, and that kind of stuff? So there are lots of initiatives right now about ethical AI, responsible AI, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We just spoke about metrics. We're all obsessed
Yeah.
with metrics as scientists, oriented people. How do we measure that stuff?
I think for now, the ones that we all agree we can measure, it's fairness, right? It's making sure that the model is also robust. It's the explainability. It's also making sure that it's transparent. I think for all those metrics, those are the ones that we're ready really to monitor. And there again, I think that data should really be made available to then those people that are maybe less, that have less knowledge about the data. And I think there maybe what we can do is just say like, yes, we have been checking for bias. We have been checking for making sure that it's explainable, that it is, that we have all of that. So I think that part, yeah.
I have a feeling we're going to segue into ethics in just a moment, but what do you think about the measurability of fairness and all that kind of stuff?
Also, the issue with this is that, fairness metrics are often mutually contradictory. What you're looking at when you're looking at group level metric fairness might be completely contradictory to when you're looking at an individual level fairness. And so how do you reconcile that? Well, you can't reconcile that just based off of data science. Data science won't tell you which one to use. That is, at the end of the day, a business decision and a leadership decision. So there's an awful lot whereby we're trying to put on the heads of a data scientist things which at the end of the day are ethical decisions and business decisions, and so which they cannot answer. And they shouldn't be the ones in charge of answering. So there is this level of, if you want to get responsible AI, ethical AI, you need much more senior level leadership to be involved in this and take an active role in this. The problem is that a lot of senior level leadership just does not have any experience with these technologies and doesn't know how to. I'm really comforted though by the fact that so many organizations are putting in new chief data and analytics officers who have either been practitioners or at least have been involved in these kind of projects previously, so they have a sense of what the risks are, what success looks like. And so I'm really excited that there's this evolving maturity and there is this category of new leaders who can actually more meaningfully play that role.
I think, somewhat echoing your first point, I think that success in responsible AI is more about process than outcome. And I was just saying that I love metrics, but I think that you're trying to work with unknown unknowns here. So I think having a robust process, There's the phrase shift left that goes around, and thinking about from conception, from design, you should be doing threat modeling, you should be doing responsible tech tools to understand what are the potential unintended consequences, how can you mitigate them? Because it's one thing to have fairness metrics and say, according to this metric, my model is fair, and it's another to realize that on the ground, people's lives are impacted in a negative way. And I think process is the only answer to that.
I love the idea that there can be diametrically opposed metrics which you can't reconcile with each other. It's like compressing an image. You can either compress it a lot and reduce the quality, or you can maximize the quality and make it very large, but you can't do both necessarily. They're by definition. And so the question is, if we do agree that you can't achieve data equality or data fairness and all these things, it is sort of going to fall on somebody's lap to make these decisions. In the same way that how much risk is the company willing to take, financial risk?
Yeah.
What position are we going to take? Because I think lawyers and others want to think of it as are we good? But there is no are we good. It's where do we want to be?
Yeah.
What position do we want to take? And okay, is that, well, I'm going to ask it openly because I want you guys to say it, but is that something that falls on the lap of the data scientist, the data science team, the IT team, the C-suite, the shareholders? Where does it fall?
I think it's really, it's because we've done those projects, it starts from the C-suite, but it entails everyone. So it often starts by the request of the risk management teams, and then we work together with the data science teams, and we look, for example, at a lot of models that they have, and then we start plotting them, like from a fairness perspective, from a robustness perspective, we say, okay, this is where you are, where do you want to go? And it's not just that, it's also, as we say, processes, like what is a unified model lifecycle? You have those models, for example, capital requirements, right? Or know your customer, compliancy models. They have perfect processes in place because since the financial crisis, you have solvency of Basel. So we need just to do the same work, think it through as a company, what do we want to stand for? And really, from all the models you have, from a risk perspective, just have a flow that everyone knows, this is how we do it, this is how we're going to monitor for it. So no, it's not just one, it's really an enterprise-wide effort, and that you want to have standards and processes, technology, and then the people in place, because it's really the three of those that are involved.
I completely agree with everything that you're saying. It's just that in order to get that, I think you need a class of AI-literate leaders who will push for that kind of organizational change, who will create the platforms, who will go in and put into place the processes and get the talent in order to get that to happen.
Yeah.
So that's what they need to build. But in order to push for that and realize that that's what they need to build and guide that creation of that, I think you do need this category of leaders who actually have more of an understanding of the technologies involved. I would say AI literate or analytics literate versus data literate, because data just seems too far removed from the applications that you're applying to. And it can be easy to talk about things like data governance and data products that are very, very far away from the actual application that's going to be delivered on it. But that's just me.
I'll take a controversial take and answer your question, none of the above. And I'll give an example. Some of the work I've been doing has been around auditing recommender systems about kind of toxic content that's being recommended. And it doesn't take too much imagination to say that inside of YouTube, whoever, they've got a little dial, and on one side it's more engagement, and on one side it's less hate speech. And they have to make some trade-off in how they're going to prioritize engagement versus signals around predictions about toxic content. And I don't think that YouTube should be making those decisions by themselves. So I think this is where we need stronger regulation. This is where we need better industry standards. I do think that this is something that, if I were to answer your question, I would say the C-suite, and they have to decide what risks they want to take. But we need to create an incentive structure that means this dial is moved according to social benefit, not just maximizing the 5-year horizon, whatever profitability for the company.
Who do we? Let's bring it over to ethics.
Yeah.
How does one become an expert in ethics?
Well, maybe from my perspective, right? Like, indeed, it started with data science, and I think already since a while, IBM already 6 years ago, right? We started to say like, hey, how are we going to govern? Because that's what we see at companies. How are we going to work with it? And I think, of course, I live in Brussels, so I go often to listen in what the EU AI Act is all about. I've been in a lot of panels. I've seen the conversation coming from, oh, when you're in a car, self-driving car, and there is a kid, then a wall, and which one are you going to take? We've really moved to being way more specific. And I think just by being in the space of AI and understanding when we were talking to companies how important it is, I think you just naturally, for me, you flow into it, right? So, and I think also what I want to say also on what you said about compliancy, for us, AI governance has really 3 pillars. It's really enforcing throughout the life cycle, then having the risk management, and then also how do you adhere to compliancy, and compliancy will make sure that companies, they do not do copyright infringements, for example, like the EU AI Act. But yeah, to come to your, it's really by being in the AI space and seeing the importance of having a good, ethics discussion about it.
There's been so much work which has been done when it comes to the ethical principles around AI that I think we've over-rotated on that. So we have a lot of good high-level guidance on what it is that we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, but then when it comes to then drawing that back to, well, then how would that be done in practice? And that's where often it starts to fall apart. So it's one of those things where it's like, how on earth can we have be able to attain any of those principles if at the end of the day we have no idea what data was used, what code was used, what model was used, and the prediction that was keyed off of it that led to this bad outcome. So there's just so much low-hanging fruit in terms of implementing best practice at the level of data science and the level of tracking, reproducibility, and testing, above all testing, that we can do and that needs to be done. And I really think that that's where more of the focus should be right now versus on the high-level principles. Because at the end of the day, I think most of us know and want to be ethical. The problem is on the how do we actually go about doing it, and how do we make sure that we catch those mistakes that we're doing. And there it's a question about implementing best practices. And one, it's still not 100% clear on what those best practices are. We need to get more maturity around that. But right now, there's very little incentive, really, to be going in and enforcing those and implementing those yet. It's coming, but I think that's where most of our attention really should be, versus, again, worrying versus those higher level questions of on the ethics side of things.
I totally agree. I think that ethics is the easy part in a sense. I think ethics is, are you creating malware to steal people's data? Are you using deceptive design to trick people into opting into things they didn't mean to opt into, whatever else? I think kind of what you're referring to later, I would call responsible tech rather than ethical tech. And I think when it comes down to it, responsible tech, it's just good engineering practices that you understand what the impact of your system is going to be. Ethics is more about what are you designing your system to do, and hopefully, if you're a mature organization, you're designing it to do something that's aligned with social values anyway.
So, not showing ads, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think ads are inherently unethical. I think that if your users you're manipulating them through deceptive design to opt into having their data collected for ad targeting, I think there's really interesting, I'm working with a coalition of civil society organizations now. We're putting together some policy recommendations for the EU Commission around kind of operationalization of the Digital Services Act. And one thing that's happened with the GDPR is that there's been a decision that if a platform is inferring personal data, that counts as personal data. So there were papers like 10, 15 years ago showing that social media likes, you can infer someone's sexual orientation and their gender and their education and everything else. So all of a sudden these platforms are processing all this personal information. And do they have meaningful consent to do that or not? So that's my question behind ad tech. I think ad tech I have other issues with too, but the first question is, are you tricking people into agreeing to what you do?
Well, let's say the company is inferring personal data from, or sort of implicitly, but accurately nonetheless. And we have search engines and other big companies that are sort of driven by this kind of data. And it's not clear to me that everybody would agree on whether that behavior is ethical or not.
Yeah. I think
so, because I get a little bit the sense from these answers here, and I'm going to play hardball like I said yesterday, I get the sense that we all know what's good and what's right and what's not. Not so sure about that.
Your example is the perfect one
and again, what does this have to do with AI?
No, I think your example of ads is a great one. Do we want to allow targeting of children with advertising?
Right.
And that's one of those questions which I don't think we should be leaving that to companies to decide on their own. Yeah. I think that is one of those perfect examples of where we should have regulation. We should have civil society being a lot more involved in making those kind of assessments and implying those. So there is definitely a role for regulation here, but it's probably at that level of the outcome, the versus on the individual methods or techniques or processes that folks are using to get there.
So normative ethics, that's what we're saying is the best kind of ethics.
Yeah, but I think a little bit the distinction you made is indeed, I think that at some point, as I said, 5 years ago, we were talking about the ethics. Now we start to have tools and processes to really be doing it, and we only see the financial sector really taking the actions. The other companies, they are kind of looking. So we definitely should not leave behind the ethical part with the compliancy, but those metrics, really monitoring them and automating, like getting the metadata, you can do that automatically, right? While you're coding, just getting automatically your metadata. I hear so many large companies where the data scientists open their Word document and are writing down what they're doing, right? So I think from those two levels, we should really progress. That's probably a bit what I hear here too, yeah.
I think there's strong incentives from the financial markets to lead in ethics because there's a lot to be gained from being biased. I mean, let's say, for example, that atheists always pay back their debts, and so they get auto-approved on all loan approvals. And so you have a model that's biased against everybody that's not atheist. Is that a good risk management system, or is it unfair and we should sort of even out?
So I think we're kind of conflating two layers, and like the question of whether we should, target ads to children or whatever. I mean, there's legislation, evolving legislation, but legislation that's deciding these questions. The same about, there's a lot of financial regulations around what sorts of bias are allowable, not allowable, under what circumstances. So I think it's not, IBM or Thoughtworks or Domino that should be answering these questions. We should be operationalizing the decisions that are made through a democratic process. So that's why I say the ethics question to me is less interesting in that I think it's something that should happen through public discourse. Whereas the responsible tech is how do we operationalize these values in the technology that we're building, and how do we ensure that we're aligned with what society is asking for. So it's like I say, the law has said for, 10 years now, that you're not allowed to process personal data without explicit consent.
Right.
And now the question is like, okay, what about inferred personal data? What about this? What about that? And that's where things get stickier, and that's where responsible tech comes in.
Right. So democratic processes. I guess one question that we have from the audience that becomes relevant here is, they're wondering, you mentioned a couple of times that we do have tools in place to be able to start working effectively with this right now. Actually, the person asked, or the people asked, what is the best model monitoring strategy? But I guess that ties in a little bit to what AI governance, MLOps, and responsible AI have to do with each other. Yeah. Do they actually tie into each other? And what are the tools that you need to be able to get started with this kind of stuff if ultimately you want to have a responsible AI and ethics strategy?
Yeah. So from IBM's perspective and the engagements that we've already done at multiple companies, what we actually do is that first of all, we do automatic metadata collection while you're coding. Then we automatically monitor, right, for fairness. And what we do then is really get that data into a dashboarding for risk management where you have also your workflows in place, where they can really put a workflow, business controls for the entire company, and also where they can make sure, like, okay, well, when you have compliancy, right, that you have automatically, again, that in your business controls. So just to make sure that when you're monitoring, that immediately you get a flag, hey, here is a problem. Now, what is the workflow that needs to happen throughout my company to actually really mitigate this risk, right? So that's really, I think, end-to-end. It's not just the monitoring part of your AI model, it's getting that information really to a centralized governance platform. And we're not saying you need to centralize all your tools, you need to centralize your metadata, and really the metadata of have you been monitoring, even knowing on which data set it was built, right? Like having all that metadata the most automatically as we can, right? Like not in a little Word document somewhere where maybe one time you will find it. So really that part where you combine the monitoring part really with processes throughout your company. So that's really, when we do projects, that's what we see, what's really resonating the most and works well.
Metadata has come up a couple of times. What do you think in terms of the tools and support for achieving responsible AI and ethical guidelines that you can measurably follow?
I think I would speak less to tools and more to approaches. I think, I'll give an example. When I was with Google some years ago, I helped them navigate a transition within their search products to focusing exclusively on quality metrics to also focusing more on engagement and retention and growth types of metrics. And I think the importance is what I would call guardrails. And you can optimize, I mean, the kind of silly example is what if Google wants to optimize for the number of search queries being issued and nothing else? So the funny thing is the best way to do that is to actually break search, make it unusable, because so many people rely on Google that if it takes them 5 searches to finally get what they're looking for, they're going to do it. So your searches are going to spike, at least for a while. But that's where you need to have guardrail metrics around quality. And I think this is a fairly universal issue. I don't want to give a speech, I know we have not a lot of minutes left, but I would encourage people to check out Goodhart's Law and the concept of how if you optimize aggressively for a single metric, you're pretty much always going to do something wrong, basically. And so suites of metrics that allow you to understand the situation on the ground are really critical.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
And metrics.
Exactly.
And
metrics.
I mean, it's reminding me a little bit of back during the 90s when everybody was like, shareholder value, shareholder value, shareholder value, and the value of my stock price was the only thing that mattered. And then I think it was Robert Kaplan came out with a balanced scorecard approach. It was like, no, you need to be looking at these multiple dimensions of performance. And I mean, that is absolutely the case when it comes to machine learning, AI, data science. That yes, we do need to be going and looking at specific entropy metrics for model drift, but we also need layers on top of that which are looking at fairness. We need layers on top of that which are looking at particular business outcomes that we're looking to affect, and we need the agility to be able to go in and take those different views of what it is that we're doing from a business point of view and from a technical point of view. I would say, though, going back to that point around metadata, is that, well, there's really not a whole lot of point for us going in and collecting all of these things and monitoring of these things if we don't take action off of them, obviously. And I think that's implicit in what you were saying, is that being able to close that loop. So we all usually talk about continuous improvement, the ability to go in and detect when we've got drift and then go in and retrain and redeploy. But in the context of machine learning, this isn't just continuous improvement, this is continuous adaptation. All models are always degrading all of the time. So it's even more important to be able to close that cycle and adapt very quickly than ever before.
Yeah. And maybe what I want to add to that is that also, we talk a lot about AI, but for example, in the financial industry, our customers, sometimes they have 700 models, of which only 50 are AI models, right? But maybe you're taking a decision based on an average, based on a data set, and there might be bias in. So I see sometimes people, oh, I'm not affected, I'm not doing that much AI, I have 10 models in production, it's all I need to do. So it's also way more than just AI. We take plenty of decisions, and I think for data scientists to maybe also understand that it's not just their AI models, but that throughout a company, so many decisions are based on models, even a simple average. I think that's also important to understand, right? That it's more than just AI.
Certainly when it comes to lawyers, it's very easy to take the approach of, rather than being fair, I will make it impossible to detect that I'm unfair. And those are not in any way, shape, or form the same thing. So early on you would see, for example, a lot of principles saying that we should not collect sensitive data around minority status, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. Great. How on earth are we going to know whether our models are systematically discriminatory against those groups?
That comes up in every conversation.
Yeah,
like there
exactly.
is the EU AI Act is saying you need to monitor for bias, but you told us to never keep that data for us, right? So yeah.
Well, that's great. I want to hear, we have 3 minutes left, but I want to hear, what do you call them, tropes about ethics. What are your biggest pet peeves when it comes to responsible AI and AI ethics that people parrot, but which they've totally misunderstood? Without making it a 45-minute speech, what are the biggest tropes? I thought this was a great example. You told us to correct for it, but we're not allowed to measure it. How can we correct for it? Perfect example.
I would say there's a certain, I would call it ethical sleight of hand that happens. And the example I would give, say you have an ad tech business, for example, and you say, we're very ethical, we don't want to make money on ad tech, we just want to show the most useful ads to our users. You know, we're being very benevolent here. And it's like, it turns out it's very difficult to measure if an ad is useful to someone or not. So how are you going to measure it? Well, the best we can think of is just whether they click on it or not. And like coincidentally, that's aligned with our business model, but really we're just trying to show them what's useful. So I think there's this lack of sophistication where it's like when you give people a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you give people an AI system, everything looks like a metric. So you have some social good you want to accomplish. It's very difficult to measure. You find some metric that approximates it, but then you end up breaking that association between that metric and that good and end up doing harm in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of my particular pet peeves are when folks are not being specific about what they mean when it comes to AI machine learning. And you read certain standards when it comes to risk mitigation and others where you could literally go through and replace the words AI with technology. Mm-hmm. And at that level, it doesn't become helpful because you're removing it from so far away from what the use cases are and what the methods are that you're using that people don't have any real guidance as to what they should be doing about it.
This is the face of everybody on the EU level trying to figure out what to do next about AI, while at the same time the engineers are sitting at home tinkering, trying to build more fun and more awesome things. It's a little bit of an arms race that we're in right now, but at the very least we have a number of tools in order to measure things.
Yeah.
We need to spend time figuring out if they're opposed to each other, and we need to reorganize to be able to be aware of these things and be actionable about them.
And change management.
And change management.
Throughout the company, yeah.
So did we ever agree on whether there is a difference between data governance and AI governance from this perspective? What do you say, yes or no answers? How about it?
I think yes, but they're tightly coupled. You need both of them.
Okay, so different but tightly coupled.
But tightly coupled, yeah.
I would say yes. I think that AI governance is a superset of data governance.
Superset. Okay, that's cool. So more requirements.
Yeah, I think there's unique risks of AI. I mean, it depends on what you mean by AI.
Right. Yeah, that's what you said. Right.
Fully agree. Data governance is a component of AI governance, but not the other way around.
All right.
Yeah.
This was an engaging talk, and man, I wish we could continue. In fact, I think maybe if you guys are here this evening, we probably will continue. For everybody at home, I hope you enjoyed the talk. I'll be seeing you in the next one very soon. See ya.
Yeah.